The city terrace shimmered like a jewel in the crown of Park Avenue. From the top floor of the Eternity Building, the restaurant offered a panoramic view of New York City that justified, at least partially, the exorbitant prices on the menu. As she balanced 3 plates on her left forearm, Louisa Rivers watched the sunset transform the concrete jungle into a golden tapestry. That was the only genuine reward of her job. Table 6, shrimp in champagne sauce for the lady, medallion of beef in port wine for the gentleman, and the gourmet salad for the young lady, Louisa. Served with precision, her smile as rehearsed as her speech. "Would you care for anything else? May I suggest the Chardonnay Reserve wine to accompany your meal?" The middle-aged man nodded without even looking at her. To the regulars of the city terrace, waitresses like Louisa were invisible, mere extensions of the cutlery and dinnerware. She had grown accustomed to it. 3 years ago, Louisa occupied very different positions. A graduate in business administration with a specialization in finance from the Wharton School of Business, an intern at the prestigious brokerage firm Goldman Sachs, and the daughter of Edward Rivers, founder of Eco Rivers Construction, a pioneering company in green-certified buildings in the United States. Her future seemed mapped out in straight, upward lines, until everything fell apart. As she returned to the kitchen, Louisa allowed herself a moment of remembrance. Her mother, Beatrice, diagnosed with multiple sclerosis after a sudden onset, the astronomical costs of experimental treatment in Switzerland, and, as a final blow, the predatory lawsuit brought against Eco Rivers Construction by the Alastair Group, a giant in the American real estate market. "Louisa, the 9 o'clock reservation has arrived. VIP table." Thaddeus, the maitre d', yanked her from her thoughts. "It's big shots from the Alastair Group. The manager is already on edge." The name made her stomach churn. The Alastair Group, the conglomerate that had devoured her father's company through a series of fabricated lawsuits, alleging irregularities in government contracts that never existed. When they finally managed to prove their innocence, Eco Rivers Construction was already bankrupt from legal costs, and the Alastair Group acquired its assets for a fraction of their value. "Who's coming?" Louisa asked, adjusting her impeccable black uniform. "Raphael Alastair and an entourage, the owner's son. Looks like they're celebrating an acquisition." Thaddeus lowered his voice. "That brat has a reputation for being a nightmare. He's already gotten 3 restaurant managers fired for inadequate service." Louisa took a deep breath. The son of the man who had destroyed her family would be sitting in her section. The universe had a wicked sense of humor. As she meticulously arranged the silver cutlery on the round table near the window, Louisa observed her reflection in the glass. At 27, her face still bore traces of the ambitious young woman who had once planned to revolutionize the American financial market. But now there was something more. A hardness in her brown eyes, a tension in her jaw that betrayed sleepless nights, worrying about medical bills. Her cell phone vibrated in her pocket, a message from her father. "We managed to schedule the next infusion for next week. Your mother is excited." Edward Rivers, at 58, now worked as an independent consultant, trying to rebuild his reputation in the market. His construction company, which had employed over 200 people and had pioneered sustainable projects in the United States, was now just a forgotten subsidiary in the Alastair Group's vast portfolio. "They're here." Sergio, the manager's urgent voice, made all the staff straighten up. "Louisa, personally attend to Mr. Alastair. Don't let anything go wrong." The murmur in the restaurant momentarily subsided as the group entered. Raphael Alastair, heir to the Alastair Empire, walked as if the floor should be grateful for being trodden upon by his Italian shoes. Tall, with a physique honed in luxury gyms and a smile that displayed perfectly aligned teeth, he could be on the cover of any business magazine, and often was. Behind him, 4 middle-aged executives followed like satellites orbiting a larger planet. "Table for Alastair," Raphael announced to the maitre d', who was already bowing in deference. "Certainly, Mr. Alastair. This way, please." Louisa watched the group settle at the table she had just set. Raphael sat with his back to the window, ensuring that he, and not the breathtaking view, was the center of attention. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Louisa, and I will be looking after you this evening," she introduced herself, distributing the leather-bound menus. "May I suggest you start with our selection of seafood appetizers? The chef received fresh lobsters today." Raphael didn't even look at her. "Bring the best champagne you have." "Dummy. Perignon Rosé, 2006 or older." "Yes, sir." Louisa noted the order, keeping her face neutral. "And I want to speak to the sommelier. The last champagne I drank here was served at the wrong temperature," he continued, now fiddling with his phone. "Certainly. I'll call Charles immediately." As she walked away to fetch the champagne and the sommelier, Louisa heard Raphael's loud laugh. "I just received confirmation. Green Energy Innovations is officially bankrupt. On Monday, we start dismembering that junk." His fellow executives laughed and congratulated him. Louisa froze for a second. Green Energy Innovations, the renewable energy startup that had developed a revolutionary system of high-efficiency solar panels. It was frequently in the specialized newspapers. Charles, the sommelier, hurried past her. "Alistair's son is here. My God, last time he got the manager at the St. Regis fired because the wine was oxidized. It was a 30-year-old Bordeaux." In the cellar, as she selected the champagne bottle, Louisa thought of her mother. The experimental treatment was showing results, but it cost over $10,000 a month. Her waitress salary, even in a luxury restaurant like the City Terrace, barely covered half. The rest came from savings her father had managed to hide before the bankruptcy. When she returned to the table, Raphael was gesticulating emphatically, his face flushed with excitement or alcohol, probably both. "So I told our legal department, find any irregularity, no matter how small, file a lawsuit, make noise in the media, drive down the stock price. In 3 months, the company worth $200 million was begging us to accept 30. The executives nodded, impressed. One of them, older, seemed uncomfortable. But Raphael, Green Energy Innovations had promising technology. We could have formed a strategic partnership instead of a hostile takeover. Raphael rolled his eyes. "Partnership? For what? To share profits?" "No, Maurice. My method is more efficient. When you file 50 simultaneous lawsuits against a small company, they don't have the money to defend against all of them. They go bankrupt, and then we buy the technology for half the price." He smiled, pleased with himself. "I learned from the best. My father used this strategy since the 90s. Louisa served the champagne with hands that struggled not to tremble. The tactic Raphael described was exactly what they had used against Eco River's construction. 53 simultaneous lawsuits, all eventually dismissed for lack of evidence, but only after the company was already financially drained. "The menu, gentlemen," she offered, her voice surprisingly firm. "I want the truffle-crusted fillet," Raphael said, still not looking at her. "Rare. And tell the chef that last time it was more medium rare. If it happens again, I'll speak to him personally." The rest of the group placed their orders, and Louisa noted everything methodically while a storm brewed within her. 3 years of suppressed anger, of crying alone at night, of seeing her father age decades in months, all because of the tactics this man described with such pride. When she returned to the kitchen, her face was so pale that Thaddeus asked if she was feeling unwell. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. But she wasn't. For the first time in 3 years, Louisa felt something different from the numbness that had kept her functioning. It was a crystal-clear clarity, a cold fury that pushed away all distractions. As she organized the orders, she looked at the calendar on the kitchen wall. Friday. Tomorrow would be her day off, which she would spend at the hospital with her mother, watching her receive medication that cost more than Louisa earned in a month. And all because men like Raphael Alistair saw companies not as living organisms, made of people, dreams, and hard work, but as prey to be hunted and devoured. The chef announced that the first course was ready. Louisa picked it up, her face a mask of professionalism. As she walked toward Raphael Alistair's table, something inside her made a decision. Tonight, for the first time since her world had crumbled, Louisa Rivers would refuse to be invisible. Raphael Alistair raised his champagne flute, the golden liquid reflecting the soft lighting of the city terrace. To another successful acquisition, he toasted with his companions. "On Monday, we start dismembering Green Energy Innovations, and selling the patents to our subsidiary in Asia. The estimated profit is 400%. Louisa placed the salmon carpaccio dish in the center of the table, each movement an internal battle between professionalism and growing indignation. "And what about the brilliant engineers who created that technology?" asked one of the younger executives, Andrew, as he served himself the appetizer. "They could be valuable to the group," Raphael let out a disdainful laugh. "Engineers are like taxis. There's always another one around the corner. We need the patents, not the people." Across the dining room, a young waiter named Peter accidentally knocked over an empty glass while serving a nearby table. The noise, though discreet, was enough to attract Raphael's irritated attention. "Incompetence," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This place isn't what it used to be." Peter, visibly embarrassed, hurried to clean up the small accident. Louisa knew him well. It was his first real job. He was funding his culinary school, and he had a newborn daughter. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir," said Sergio, the manager, instantly materializing beside the table. "I assure you this will not happen again." "I hope not," Raphael replied dryly. "The last time I frequented an establishment with such careless service, I made sure the person responsible never worked anywhere decent again." Peter's face went pale. Everyone in the restaurant knew he was on probation. "Mr. Alistair," Sergio was practically pleading now, "Peter is new to our team, but I can assure you—" "I don't care if he was born yesterday," Raphael cut in. "If you want to keep the Alistair Group as a client, I suggest you demonstrate a higher standard, starting by dismissing incompatible elements." An uncomfortable silence settled. The other customers pretended not to hear while the restaurant staff watched with apprehension. Sergio, caught between a rock and a hard place, hesitated for a moment before turning to Peter. "Peter, please go to the office," he said in a low voice. "We'll talk after your shift." Everyone knew what that meant. Peter, with contained tears in his eyes, nodded and walked away towards the back of the restaurant. Louisa felt her blood boil. The injustice was so flagrant, so unnecessarily cruel. For an empty glass, a simple, inconsequential error. "The main courses will be ready in a few minutes," she announced mechanically, withdrawing before her expression betrayed her. In the kitchen, she found Peter collecting his belongings. "He asked for my head, didn't he?" the young man asked, his voice trembling. "I haven't even finished my probationary period. I won't get unemployment benefits." "Peter, I'm so sorry," Louisa said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't fair." "Fair?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Nothing is fair in this world, Louisa. People like him do what they want, and people like us suffer the consequences." He took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. "How am I going to pay the rent this month? How am I going to explain to Camilla that I lost my job because of a glass?" Louisa had no answers. Peter picked up his worn backpack and left through the back, leaving behind not just a job, but also dreams and responsibilities. "The fillets are ready," the chef announced, oblivious to the small drama that had just unfolded. With the perfectly arranged dishes on the tray, Louisa returned to the dining room. Raphael Alistair's group was now animatedly discussing their next corporate victim. "Solaris Technologies would be an excellent target," commented one of the executives in a grey suit. "They have promising energy storage technology, but are having cash flow problems after international expansion." "Interesting," Raphael replied, cutting his fillet. "Order a full analysis for Monday. I want to know which contracts we could legally challenge." Serving the dishes with professional precision, Louisa kept an ear on the conversation. Solaris Technologies was a long-time partner of her father's, one of the few companies that remained loyal even after the fall of Eco River's construction. "Everything in order, gentlemen?" she asked, with her rehearsed smile. Raphael finally looked at her, but his eyes passed over her figure as if observing an object, not a person. "The fillet is cold," he declared, even though the meat was still sizzling on the plate. "My apologies, sir. I can get you another one immediately." "Don't bother," he replied dismissively. "Just make sure it's deducted from the bill. And bring more wine." It was at that moment, observing the petty pleasure on Raphael's face as he exercised power over someone he considered inferior, that something broke inside Louisa. 3 years of silent humiliation, 3 years carrying the burden of injustice, 3 years of being invisible. It all culminated in that instant. "Anything else, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm. "Yes," Raphael said, now turning his attention back to his colleagues. "As I was saying, the beauty of our strategy is its systematic nature. It's not just one lawsuit, it's dozens simultaneously. We financially suffocate them. When they can no longer pay their lawyers, we generously offer to buy their assets for a fraction of the value." "Brilliant," agreed one of the younger executives, clearly trying to impress. "It's like an anaconda, slowly squeezing until the prey can no longer breathe." Raphael smiled, pleased with the analogy. "Exactly. And the best part is that everything is technically legal. It doesn't matter that 90% of the lawsuits are eventually dismissed. The damage is already done." "What about the employees?" asked the same executive who had previously inquired about the engineers. "Collateral damage," Raphael replied with a shrug. "Business is business. If they were really good, they'd work for bigger companies like ours." He chuckled. "My father always says that compassion is a luxury only the weak can afford." That was the last straw. Louisa felt something awaken within her. Not just anger, but a crystal-clear clarity, an absolute certainty that this was the moment to act. "Excuse me, Mr. Alistair," she said, her voice rising above the restaurant's murmur. "I'd like to make an observation about your business strategy." The silence that followed was instantaneous and profound. Raphael turned slowly, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "Are you talking to me?" he asked, genuinely perplexed that a waitress would have the audacity to address him outside the context of service. "Yes, sir." Louisa stood firm, aware that all eyes in the restaurant were now fixed on her. "I couldn't help but overhear your analysis of predatory acquisitions, and I'd like to offer an alternative perspective." Raphael looked around, as if expecting someone to explain the joke. His companions seemed equally astonished. "You," he said finally, pointing a finger at Louisa, "a waitress, want to give me business advice?" His laugh was nervously followed by his colleagues. "This is priceless. Go ahead then, Professor Waitress. Enlighten us with your wisdom." The condescending tone only strengthened Louisa's resolve. She placed the tray on the nearby side table and faced Raphael directly. "Your strategy of predatory litigation as an acquisition method, Mr. Alistair, represents an antiquated and fundamentally myopic paradigm of corporate management." Her voice was clear, articulate, completely different from the polite subservience he would expect from a server. "It is a parasitic approach that sacrifices long-term value for immediate gains." Raphael's sneering smile froze. "First," Louisa continued, now in full control, "by destroying smaller companies merely to acquire their physical assets or intellectual property, you systematically eliminate the innovation ecosystem upon which your own conglomerate depends for future growth. It's like burning the seeds that would produce your harvest tomorrow." A murmur ran through the restaurant. Sergio, the manager paralyzed by the bar, watched the scene with growing horror. "Second," Louisa continued, "your tactic destroys human capital value. When green energy innovations is dismembered on Monday, you won't just be letting engineers go. You'll be squandering years of institutional knowledge, team dynamics, and innovation cultures that are impossible to artificially recreate." Raphael tried to interrupt her, but she pressed on mercilessly. "Third, this strategy creates long-term regulatory vulnerabilities. The hostile acquisition of Silvera Renewables in 2021 attracted antitrust scrutiny that resulted in fines exceeding by 30% the savings obtained by the undervalued acquisition, not to mention the reputational damage that led to the loss of government contracts in the infrastructure sector." The executives at the table exchanged glances, visibly uncomfortable. The specific mention of internal Alistair Group data suggested that Louisa was no mere waitress. And as for the claim that business is business, allow me to cite the 2019 Harvard Business Review longitudinal study, which categorically demonstrated that companies with collaborative acquisition strategies financially outperform corporate predators over a 10-year horizon, with an average ROI 23% higher and stock volatility 18% lower. The entire restaurant was in absolute silence. Raphael, his face now red with humiliation, finally found his voice. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he shouted, partially standing up. "Someone who understands the difference between a builder's strategy and a destroyer's strategy, Mr. Alistair. Your father knew the difference back in the 90s, when he collaborated with Andrade Construction on the New Horizon project, sharing risks and rewards instead of trying to destroy them. The result was one of the most profitable ventures in the history of the American real estate sector." The mention of Raphael's father seemed to hit him like a slap. He looked around, realizing that the entire restaurant was watching his public humiliation. "You're fired," he finally managed to say. "Actually," Sergio interjected, finally finding the courage to approach, "that's the prerogative of the restaurant management." He turned to Louisa Rivers, his face a mask of controlled panic. "Ms. Rivers, please leave immediately. Your employment is terminated." Louisa Rivers nodded calmly, as if it were merely an expected consequence. Without haste, she removed her black apron and placed it on the table, next to Raphael's plate. "One last observation, Mr. Almeida," she said, her voice now softer, but audible to everyone. "The strategy you described with such pride? It was precisely the one your company used against Eco Rivers Construction 3 years ago. 53 simultaneous lawsuits, all eventually dismissed for lack of merit, but only after the company was already financially ruined." Raphael's face registered a flicker of recognition. "My name is Louisa Rivers. Edward Rivers is my father. And you've just given me the opportunity to say what I've wanted to for 3 years. Your business model isn't just unethical. It's fundamentally stupid." With that, she turned and walked calmly towards the exit, leaving behind a restaurant in a state of shock and a completely speechless Raphael Almeida. The sunlight filtered through the window of the small apartment in Greenwich Village, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Louisa Rivers stared at the peeling ceiling, lying on the narrow bed where she had spent a sleepless night. The digital clock on the bedside table read 6:47 a.m. Her cell phone vibrated for the 10th time in less than an hour. Another unknown number. Since she had left the restaurant the previous night, her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Worried colleagues, curious journalists who had somehow gotten her number, and once even Trevor, the maitre d', calling, secretly to say that the video of the confrontation was going viral on social media. Apparently, one of the customers had discreetly filmed the entire episode. Louisa Rivers picked up the phone and silenced it definitively. Her resume was already updated, but what restaurant in New York City would hire the waitress who had publicly humiliated the heir to one of the country's largest conglomerates? And without references from the Paulista Terrace, her chances at high-end establishments were practically nil. 3 years of sacrifice thrown away in 5 minutes of indignation. Was it worth it? The image of Raphael Almeida's pale face came to her mind, followed by the memory of the small smile of approval in the eyes of the older executive at the table, the only one who had questioned the heir's tactics. For a fleeting moment, Louisa Rivers felt a visceral satisfaction. Then reality reasserted itself. Her mother's medical bills wouldn't wait. The treatment couldn't be interrupted. The tiny apartment she shared with 2 other people wouldn't pay for itself. Her phone vibrated again. This time, a text message. "Ms. Rivers, this is Paul Giddings, Executive Assistant to Mr. Augustus Almeida. A car is at your disposal, in front of your building. Mr. Almeida would like to speak with you personally. It is in your interest to attend." Louisa Rivers reread the message 3 times, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Augustus Almeida, the patriarch, the founder of the empire, the man who indirectly had destroyed her family. Through the bedroom window, she saw a black sedan with tinted windows parked on the curb. No doubt there was a security guard watching her window at that very moment. Her first reaction was dread. Were they planning to sue her, blacklist her, threaten her to have the video removed? But then a darker and paradoxically more hopeful thought took shape. If they wanted to destroy her, They wouldn't need to call her for a meeting. They would have simply acted already. Louisa Rivers put on her best outfit, a discreet navy blazer over a simple white blouse, black dress pants, and the only pair of heels that hadn't completely worn out yet. It wasn't a top-tier executive suit, but it was the best she could do. When she walked down the stairs of the old building, the driver was already standing by the car, the rear door open. He didn't say a word, just nodded respectfully as she got in. The interior of the vehicle was luxurious without being ostentatious. Immaculate black leather, polished wood on the doors, a discreet panel separating the driver from the passengers. On the seat beside her was a leather folder containing a confidentiality agreement. "Mr. Giddings asks that you sign it before we arrive," the driver informed, finally speaking. "Company policy for visitors at headquarters." Louisa Rivers quickly scanned the document. It was a standard NDA, prohibiting her from disclosing any information about what she saw or heard on the Almeida Group's premises. Nothing particularly threatening or unusual. She signed. The drive to the imposing Almeida Group headquarters in the heart of Fifth Avenue took about 20 minutes. Throughout the journey, Louisa Rivers tried to organize her thoughts, prepare for any scenario. But how to prepare to face the man whose decisions had, however indirectly, put her mother in a hospital bed and her father into a spiral of depression? The car drove directly into the building's underground garage, avoiding the main entrance. A middle-aged man, impeccably dressed in a grey suit, awaited near the private elevator. "Ms. Rivers," he extended his hand formally. "Paul Giddings, please follow me." The elevator ascended directly from the basement to the 42nd floor without stops. When the doors opened, Louisa Rivers was greeted by an impressive executive floor, Italian marble flooring, contemporary art on the walls, panoramic city views through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the physical materialization of corporate power. Giddings led her through a corridor to a waiting room adjacent to what appeared to be the main office. "Please wait here. Mr. Almeida will see you in a few minutes." Alone in the antechamber, Louisa Rivers noticed an architectural peculiarity. One of the walls was entirely glass, but with a slightly mirrored sheen on the other side. She had seen that before. It was a one-way mirror. Someone could be watching her at this very moment. Her suspicion was confirmed when, minutes later, the door opened and a tall, grey-haired man entered, an enigmatic smile on his time-worn face. "Ms. Rivers," he said, his deep voice filling the room, "I am Augustus Almeida. Thank you for accepting my invitation." Augustus Almeida was the antithesis of his son. While Raphael exuded youthful arrogance, his father radiated a quiet confidence that came from decades of building an empire. His eyes, however, held the same calculating coldness. "I have the impression we've met before," Louisa Rivers said, firmly shaking the extended hand. "Indeed," Augustus smiled, indicating the glass wall. "I was dining in a private room at the Paulista Terrace last night. I have a habit of observing my son in business situations without him knowing, revealing to say the least." He indicated a different door. "Please, let's go to my office where we can talk properly." Augustus Almeida's office was surprisingly sober for a man of his position. Classic dark wood. Furniture, a few paintings of Brazilian landscapes, a bookshelf with books that seemed genuinely read. The only extravagance was the spectacular view of New York City that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Coffee?" he offered, indicating a prepared tray. "No, thank you." Louisa Rivers preferred to get straight to the point. "Why am I here, Mr. Almeida?" Augustus sat in his leather chair behind the imposing desk, studying her intently for a few seconds before answering. "Your performance last night was impressive. Reckless, certainly, but impressive." He leaned forward. "How old are you, Ms. Rivers?" 27. "And you were in your final year of business administration at NYU when you had to drop out, correct? Specializing in finance and corporate sustainability." Louisa Rivers felt a chill. They had already investigated her background. "Yes, I had to leave college when my father's company went bankrupt." "Eco Rivers," Augustus nodded thoughtfully. a construction company focused on sustainable buildings. Your father was a pioneer in the country in LEED certifications, if I'm not mistaken. You know very well who my father is and what happened to his company, Louisa Rivers replied, unable to keep neutrality in her voice. A subsidiary of your conglomerate orchestrated the litigation campaign that destroyed it. Augustus didn't deny it. Business is often impersonal, Ms. Rivers. Decisions are made considering numbers, not people. Except when people are the numbers themselves, Mr. Almeida. 200 employees lost their jobs. My father lost his life's work. My mother lost access to health insurance when she needed it most. A heavy silence hung between them for a few moments. Your confrontation with my son, Augustus finally continued, revealed not only courage, but a sophisticated understanding of corporate strategies and their long-term consequences. Your analysis of human capital and regulatory vulnerabilities was insightful. You cited specific data from our transactions that are not public knowledge. Louisa Rivers remained silent. How did you obtain this information? He asked, his voice now more curious than accusatory. I have friends who still work in the financial sector, and I read annual reports, Mr. Almeida. The real ones, not the whitewashed versions for shareholders. Your company has leaks, disgruntled people who share information. Augustus nodded slowly. Honesty. Good. He stood up and walked to the window, observing the city below. You mentioned the New Horizon project from the 90s yesterday. Do you know what made that venture so successful, Ms. Rivers? The risk-sharing structure between your group and Andrade Construction. You divided initial costs and profits proportionally, creating a model that incentivized both parties to maximize efficiency without compromising quality. Augustus turned back to her, a slight smile on his lips. Precisely. It was one of the best deals I ever made. Do you know why I abandoned that approach years later? Because hostile takeovers generate quicker returns, even if smaller in the long run, Louisa Rivers replied without hesitation. It's the difference between cultivating a fruit tree and clear-cutting a forest to sell timber. The patriarch chuckled softly. You have a gift for pointed metaphors. He returned to his chair. My son has no patience for cultivation. Raphael wants immediate results, quick wins, headlines in financial papers. He confuses noise with impact. Why are you telling me this? Louisa Rivers asked, confused by the turn of the conversation. Augustus opened a drawer and took out a folder. Because I have a proposal for you, Ms. Rivers, one that could benefit both of us. He slid the folder across the table. Louisa Rivers hesitated before opening it. Inside, she found a preliminary contract. A provisional seat on the Almeida Group's board of directors, Augustus explained before she could read all the details, specifically on the Strategic Development Committee. Louisa Rivers looked at him, incredulous. Is this some kind of joke? Do I look like someone who makes jokes, Ms. Rivers? Why would you offer a position like that to someone who publicly humiliated your son and criticized the company's strategies? Augustus leaned forward, his intense eyes fixed on hers. Because companies, just like people, need to be challenged to evolve. And because I recognize talent when I see it, even when it comes disguised as a waitress. Louisa Rivers quickly flipped through the contract, noting the substantial proposed annual fee. It was more money than she would earn in 10 years as a waitress. What's the catch? She asked, certain there was something hidden between the lines. The catch, as you put it, is twofold, Augustus replied with surprising candor. First, the seat is initially provisional. To make it permanent, you need to successfully complete a specific project. He paused significantly. Second, part of that project involves working directly with Raphael. Work with your son? Louisa Rivers couldn't hide her disbelief. After last night. Especially after last night. Augustus smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Raphael needs to learn, and you have just qualified as his most unlikely teacher. What exactly would this project involve? The renewable energy division we recently acquired, green energy. Augustus pointed to a photograph on the wall, showing a complex of solar panels. Raphael led the acquisition, but his subsequent management has been problematic. The division is bleeding money, losing talent and cancelling contracts. I need you to help fix it." Louisa Rivers couldn't suppress an ironic laugh. "So, you want me to save the company your son ruined using the same tactics that destroyed my father's?" Poetic, wouldn't you say? Augustus didn't seem minimally abashed. "Consider it an opportunity to prove your approach is superior. Transform that operation using your principles, not his." Louisa Rivers closed the folder, her mind working quickly. There was something here that didn't make sense. Why me? New York City is full of experienced executives who would give an arm for an opportunity on the Almeida Group board. Why offer it to a 27-year-old waitress who didn't complete college? Augustus stood up again, walking slowly around the table, until he was directly beside her. "Because none of those executives would have the courage to tell my son the truth directly to his face. None of them would risk their careers for principles. And because," his voice lowered slightly, "you have something to prove, not just professionally but personally." He knew exactly which buttons to push. "And if I refuse, then you leave here exactly as you came in, unemployed and with medical bills to pay. And unfortunately, with a public record of confronting one of the country's most powerful corporate heirs. Waitresses with that profile aren't exactly sought after in the market." The veiled threat was clear. "This is blackmail, Mr. Almeida. This is negotiation, Ms. Rivers. I am offering a unique opportunity to influence the future of a conglomerate you obviously despise, to transform it from the inside out." Louisa Rivers stood up, facing Augustus directly. "And your son, has he agreed to this?" "Raphael will do what I determine," the patriarch replied, with unwavering confidence. "He may not like it initially, but he will understand the value of the lesson eventually." Louisa Rivers walked to the window, observing the city where she was born and raised. Somewhere below was the small hospital, where her mother was battling multiple sclerosis. In some modest office, her father was trying to rebuild a career from the ashes. "I have conditions," she finally said, turning to face Augustus. A satisfied smile appeared on the patriarch's face. "I expected you would. First, I will report directly to you, not to Raphael or any other director. Second, I will have absolute authority over the project, on equal footing with your son. Third," she paused significantly, "I want the immediate hiring of Peter Farrell, the waiter your son had fired yesterday, for our administrative team." Augustus raised his eyebrows, surprised by the last request. "Interesting that your first demand for power is to help someone other than yourself." He nodded. "I accept your conditions. Anything else?" "Yes." Louisa Rivers picked up the folder from the table. "I want this contract reviewed by my own lawyer before signing anything." For the first time since the conversation began, Augustus Almeida genuinely laughed. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago, Ms. Rivers. Someone who also didn't take things at face value." "Who?" "Myself, when I was your age." He extended his hand for a formal shake. "Welcome to the Almeida Group, Louisa. The storm begins tomorrow at 8 a.m. As Louisa Rivers shook that hand, she felt as if she was sealing a pact with the devil himself. But sometimes, she thought, you have to go into hell to change the system from the inside out. The old industrial warehouse in Brooklyn, now the headquarters of the recently acquired green energy, buzzed with rumors. Employees huddled in small groups, exchanging theories about the mysterious meeting called for that morning. News of the acquisition by the Almeida Group had already caused enough panic. Now the imminent visit of the infamous Raphael Almeida amplified the collective anxiety. Louisa Rivers arrived 20 minutes before the scheduled time, dressed in a navy pantsuit hastily bought the day before. Thanks to the generous advance Augustus Almeida had insisted on providing, she was walking through the parking lot when she noticed a middle-aged man observing her from afar. He wore worn jeans and a flannel shirt, completely clashing with the image one would expect of an executive. "Ms. Rivers," the man approached, extending his hand. "Anthony Vasconcelos, chief engineer, or what's left of him." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Vasconcelos." Louisa Rivers shook his hand, noting the calluses characteristic of someone who worked with tools, not just keyboards. "I don't know exactly what you've come here to do," he said bluntly. "But if you're part of the firing squad, I suggest you start with me. Spare my team. Most of them have families to support. His frankness surprised Louisa Rivers. I'm not here to fire anyone. Quite the opposite. Anthony studied her with skepticism. I've heard that before. Last time they fired 30 people the next day. Mr. Vasconcelos, I can assure you that a red sports car sped into the parking lot, braking sharply near the main entrance. Rafael Almeida emerged from the vehicle, talking animatedly on his cell phone, completely oblivious to the employees watching him with apprehension. Beside him, Peter Farrell, the former waiter, now wearing a simple suit, carried a briefcase and looked simultaneously intimidated and determined. Louisa Rivers took a deep breath. Shall we go in? The meeting is about to start, and I promise it's not what you're imagining. The makeshift auditorium was packed. Approximately 50 apprehensive employees occupied every available space. On the stage, a table with 4 chairs awaited the presenters. Raphael, now hanging up his phone, headed directly there without looking at anyone. When he spotted Louisa Rivers entering from the side, his face hardened. It was the first time they had seen each other since the restaurant incident. For a tense moment, their gazes met, his filled with resentment, hers with quiet determination. Good morning, everyone. Louisa Rivers took the initiative, stepping onto the stage and positioning herself beside the table, deliberately not sitting down yet. My name is Louisa Rivers. Starting today, I will be leading the Green Energy Restructuring project along with Raphael Alistair, by direct determination of Mr. Augustus Alistair. A murmur ran through the audience. Raphael, visibly annoyed by Louisa's presentation, stood up abruptly. As my father must have mentioned, he interrupted, his tone forcibly cordial. This is a transitional phase. Ms. Rivers will bring a different perspective to the process. To be absolutely clear, Louisa continued undeterred, my authority in this project is equivalent to Mr. Alistair's. All decisions will be made jointly or, in the absence of consensus, arbitrated directly by the group's president. Raphael's face twitched almost imperceptibly. That specific stipulation seemed to be news to him. Please introduce yourselves, Louisa addressed the 2 men completing the table, so everyone knows exactly who is leading this transition. Marcus Stone, said a man in an impeccable suit and with a calculating expression, Chief Financial Officer designated for the new subsidiary. Peter Finch, the former waiter, introduced himself with a firm voice, surprising many with his presence. Executive Assistant to Ms. Rivers and Administrative Coordinator for the Transition Project. Louisa could see the confusion on Raphael's face as he recognized Peter from the restaurant. He opened his mouth to protest, but thought better of it, and remained silent. Before we explain the next steps, Louisa continued, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. No one will be laid off during the next 90 days. The statement provoked a wave of relieved sighs and hopeful glances. That's irresponsible, Raphael hissed, leaning towards her. There are obvious redundancies in the structure. 90 days, Louisa repeated, ignoring him. During that period, we will fully evaluate operations, ongoing projects, and future potential. This is not a cost-cutting exercise, Mr. Alistair. She turned to Raphael, now speaking directly to him. It's an investment in value recovery. Raphael forced a smile. For the audience. Obviously, we want to preserve the innovative spirit that made green energy an attractive acquisition. If I may, Anthony Vance stood up from the audience. We've been through 2 restructurings with external consultants in recent years. All resulted in cuts to promising projects and loss of essential talent. Why would this one be different? Raphael prepared to respond with some corporate platitude, but Louisa was quicker. Mr. Vance, cuts are the recourse of uncreative managers, or those who simply don't understand the business they're running. She walked to the edge of the stage, approaching the audience. Instead of talking about synergies and optimization, how about we discuss the Helios project? As I understand it, it was on the verge of revolutionizing solar panel efficiency when funds were frozen during the acquisition process. An astonished silence filled the auditorium. No one expected her to know details of internal projects. Helios is, Anthony stammered, surprised. How do you know about that? I did my homework, Mr. Vance. I read every report, every patent proposal, every feasibility analysis produced in the last 3 years by Green Energy. She smiled, a genuine smile this time. And frankly, I was impressed. Your team achieved a 23% breakthrough in conversion efficiency using a modified graphene substrate that no one else on the market has been able to replicate. Raphael looked at Louisa as if she had suddenly started speaking an alien language. That wasn't the kind of detail that usually interested Alistair Group executives, who were concerned only with profit margins and amortization schedules. What I propose, Louisa continued, is an inverse approach to what you're probably expecting. Instead of cutting, we will invest. Instead of dismembering, we will integrate. Instead of selling technology to Asian subsidiaries. She cast a significant glance at Raphael. We will develop it here with the team that created it. The atmosphere in the room perceptibly shifted. Fear gave way to cautious hope. This all sounds very inspiring, Marcus, the new CFO, interjected, his tone condescending. But the fact is that Green Energy has been in the red for 3 consecutive quarters. Cash flow is unsustainable. Let me guess, Louisa responded, without missing a beat. The problem started exactly when rumors of the hostile takeover emerged, correct? When contracts were cancelled by clients unsure about the company's future, when investors pulled back, when key talent began looking for more stable jobs? Marcus adjusted his tie, uncomfortable with the accuracy of the analysis. The first thing we will do, Louisa turned to the audience, is review all contracts cancelled in the last 6 months. Peter will lead this effort, working directly with the commercial team. Our goal is to recover at least 40% of them with direct guarantees from the Alistair Group. Raphael, realizing he was losing control of the narrative, stood up. Of course, we support innovative initiatives, he tried to reclaim the spotlight. But we need to be realistic about timelines and expected returns. The Alistair Group has responsibilities to its shareholders, and to its employees and to society, and to the future of the country, Louisa completed. Mr. Alistair is absolutely right. That's why our first official action will be to immediately unfreeze the funds for the Helios project and authorize the hiring of 5 more engineers for the team. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause. Raphael, caught completely by surprise, opened and closed his mouth several times before he could articulate, we didn't discuss. I'm using my authority delegated by Mr. Augustus Alistair, Louisa replied calmly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Unless you want to call your father now and question the decision. Everyone's gazes alternated between Raphael and Louisa like a particularly tense tennis match. After a moment that felt like an eternity, Raphael smiled artificially. Naturally, I support any promising initiative. We'll discuss the details after the meeting. The initial victory established, Louisa proceeded to outline the restructuring plan for the next 90 days. As she spoke, she observed the audience's expressions gradually change from skepticism to curiosity, and finally to cautious optimism. 2 hours later, when the meeting ended, Anthony Vance was the first to approach her. I don't know who you are or where you came from, he said bluntly, but you clearly understand what we're trying to build here. If you need anything from the technical team, count on me. Thank you, Anthony. We'll need all the help we can get. She smiled, tired but satisfied with the first step. When the auditorium emptied, leaving only her, Peter, and Raphael, the heir finally dropped his mask of cordiality. What the hell was that? He practically snarled. You can't just come in here and promise investments without budget approval. Actually, I can, Louisa replied calmly, organizing her notes. And you know it, unless you want to explain to your father why you're obstructing progress on day 1. This is ridiculous, and why is he here? Raphael pointed at Peter, who was silently observing the confrontation. Peter has experience in administration and is completing his MBA. He will be valuable for the transition. He was a waiter 3 days ago. And I was a waitress 2 days ago, Louisa replied without losing her composure. People are more than their current jobs, Mr. Alistair. That's precisely one of the lessons your father expects you to learn. Raphael ran, a hand through his perfectly styled hair, clearly frustrated. "This won't work. You don't have corporate experience. You don't know our culture." "That's exactly why I'm here." Louisa put her documents into the new leather folder she had bought to appear more executive. "To bring a different perspective, to question a culture that values destruction over construction." For a moment, Raphael seemed genuinely confused. "Do you really believe you can change the Alistair Group, a company with 50 years of history and established practices?" "No," Louisa replied, looking him directly in the eyes. "I believe I can change a division, and maybe, just maybe, change a person." Peter, who had been observing in silence until then, intervened. "We have a meeting with the finance department in 15 minutes, Louisa." "Thank you, Peter." She turned to leave, but stopped at the auditorium door. "Mr. Alistair, I know this situation is uncomfortable for you, but I suggest you try to see this not as a humiliation, but as an opportunity. You have a lot to learn, and so do I. The difference is, I recognize that." Leaving Raphael alone with his thoughts, Louisa and Peter headed to the next meeting. In the hallways, employees watched her with a mixture of curiosity and renewed hope. "You were amazing in there," Peter whispered, "but he'll try to sabotage you at the first opportunity." "Count on it," Louisa replied. "That's why our next stop is crucial. The finance department." "Exactly. I want to see all contracts signed in the last 6 months, especially those with external consultants and specialized service providers." Peter frowned, confused. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Conflicts of interest," Louisa replied, her voice now lower. "If Raphael is like most spoiled heirs, he's probably funneled lucrative contracts to friends or companies, in which he has an indirect stake. And if we find something like that?" Louisa smiled, but it was a different smile now, determined, almost predatory. "Then we'll have the leverage we need to ensure he doesn't hinder this company's recovery." As they walked to the finance department, Louisa thought of her father, how he had built a company based on principles, not just profits, how he always said that companies were like living organisms, not machines, how he had been destroyed by men who saw only numbers, not lives. "Are you okay?" Peter asked, noticing her distant expression. "I am," she replied, returning to the present, "just thinking about how much work we have ahead of us. Do you really think we can save this company?" Louisa stopped, watching the engineers and technicians passing through the hallways, people with families, dreams, and mortgages. "We're not just saving a company, Peter. We're saving what it represents: ethical innovation, sustainability, a better future." She took a deep breath. "And, perhaps, in the process, we're rescuing a bit of the Alistair Group's soul too. What if we don't succeed? Then at least we will have fought for the right thing." Louisa adjusted her blazer and straightened her posture. "Now let's find out where the bodies are buried." The next few hours were a deep dive into financial reports, resource allocation spreadsheets, and seemingly innocuous contracts. By the end of the day, as the sun was setting over London, Louisa found exactly what she was looking for: a strategic consulting contract worth almost £2 million with Horizon Innovations. A quick search revealed that Horizon was controlled by none other than Greg Miller, Raphael's college friend and best man. "Bingo," she murmured, printing the document and carefully tucking it into her folder. "Our insurance policy." When she finally left the Green Energy building that night, Louisa felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the feeling of doing exactly what she was born to do. She wasn't waiting tables now, she was serving a greater purpose. And if Raphael Alistair thought the battle at the restaurant had been tough, he had no idea what awaited him. The digital clock on the meeting room wall read 11:47 p.m. The Alistair Group headquarters building was practically deserted at that hour, with only a few night security guards and dedicated IT staff still present. Louisa adjusted the brightness of her laptop screen to avoid straining her tired eyes further. Over the past 6 weeks, her life had completely transformed. From a black waitress uniform to executive suits, from uncertain tips to a salary that comfortably paid for her mother's treatment, from silent humiliations to board meetings. The metamorphosis was so radical that, at times, she caught herself looking at her reflection in the building's mirrored windows, barely recognizing the woman looking back. Green energy was being reborn under her guidance. The first results were already appearing. 3 important contracts. Recovered, the technical team strengthened with new talent. The Helios project advancing at an accelerated pace. Even Raphael, surprisingly, had started to contribute productively, albeit reluctantly at first. The discovery of the fraudulent contract with his friend's company had been the turning point. When Louisa privately confronted him with the evidence, she made no explicit threats. She didn't need to. The simple fact that she knew and could, at any moment, take the information to Augustus was enough to transform Raphael's open hostility into cautious cooperation. More coffee? Peter entered the room carrying a thermos. Like Louisa, he had blossomed in his new role, proving to be a meticulous and loyal administrator. Please, I think we'll need a lot of caffeine to finish this audit. The task that kept them in the office late was monumental, a complete review of all hostile acquisitions made by the Alistair Group in the last 5 years. Augustus had requested the analysis as part of Louisa's evaluation, testing not only her technical competence, but also her resilience. You should go home, Louisa suggested, noticing Peter's deep dark circles. Camilla and the baby need you. I'm fine, he insisted, pouring coffee for both of them. Besides, your mother called me 3 times today asking why you haven't visited in 2 weeks. Louisa smiled, despite her tiredness. One of the first things she had done upon receiving her new salary was to hire Peter not only as a professional assistant, but also to help with her mother's care on days she couldn't be there. Tell her I'll definitely go on Sunday, and that the new treatment is guaranteed for the next 6 months. Peter nodded, returning to his desk in the corner of the room. For a few minutes, only the sound of keys being pressed and papers being handled filled the air. Louisa, Peter called suddenly, his voice strangely tense. I think you should see this. He held a document he had just printed from the digital file. It was an internal memo dated 3 years ago, marked strictly confidential. Louisa approached, taking the paper. As her eyes scanned the typed lines, her heart raced. The document detailed a specific strategy for the acquisition of Rivers Eco, her father's company. This wasn't within the scope of our audit, Peter observed carefully. We were only focusing on the last 5 years, and this specific case... It's personal, Louisa completed, her voice almost a whisper. The memo not only confirmed that the predatory litigation strategy had been deliberately planned against Rivers Eco, but it indicated something even more disturbing. The order had come directly from Augustus Alistair, not from a random director, not from an acquisitions committee, from the patriarch himself. There's more, Peter said, handing her another document. An internal financial report. See the highlighted section. Louisa felt her blood run cold. The report showed that in addition to orchestrating lawsuits through group subsidiaries, Augustus had personally funded a smear campaign against her father, planting false stories in the specialized press about alleged irregularities in Rivers Eco projects. He destroyed my father deliberately, Louisa murmured, a sharp pain compressing her chest. It wasn't just impersonal business, as he claimed. Peter remained silent, giving her space to process the discovery. Why? Louisa asked, more to herself than to Peter. Why would he specifically target my father's company? Rivers Eco wasn't that big. It didn't pose a real threat to the Alistair Group. Continuing to investigate, they delved into the digital archives, searching for any mention of Rivers Eco. It was after midnight when they found the final piece of the puzzle, an email from Augustus to his then legal director. Rivers refused to sell even with our generous offer. Says he built something that isn't for sale at any price. His stubbornness irritates me. Men like him need to learn that everything has a price. Proceed with the alternative strategy discussed. I want to see how long his principles survive when his company starts to sink. Louisa sank into her chair, stunned. It hadn't just been a cold corporate transaction. It had been personal. Revenge against someone who dared to challenge Augustus Alistair's mercantile vision. All this because my father refused to sell, she murmured, incredulous. because he believed in something beyond profit. "What are you going to do?" Peter asked cautiously. Louisa stared at the documents scattered across the table, her mind processing the implications. Suddenly, Augustus's proposal, his insistence on bringing her onto the board, took on a new perspective. "He knew who I was from the start," she realized aloud. "At the restaurant, he wasn't just in a private room by chance. He was specifically observing me." "Why?" "Because he saw something in me," Louisa replied, pieces clicking into place in her mind. "Not my morals or my brilliant analysis, as he claimed. He saw Her voice momentarily faltered. "He saw ruthless determination, the same kind he possesses." Peter looked confused. "I don't understand." "Augustus didn't hire me to reform the company or to teach Raphael. He hired me because he recognized in me someone capable of doing whatever it takes to win." Louisa stood up abruptly. "He's testing me, Peter, seeing if I'm a more worthy successor than his own son. That's the unsettling." "It's calculating," Louisa corrected, "exactly like him." She began to gather the incriminating documents, methodically, organizing them into a folder. "What are you going to do with this?" Peter asked, apprehensive. Louisa paused, looking out the window at the illuminated city below. London never fully slept, just like the ambitions and conspiracies that fueled its financial heart. "The question isn't what I'm going to do with these documents," she finally replied. "It's what I'm going to do with myself." "What do you mean?" "I have two options, Peter. I can confront Augustus immediately, throw these papers in his face, expose everything publicly. That would destroy my newly started career, but it would give my father some kind of symbolic justice. Or I can do what he least expects." Louisa turned, a new fire in her eyes. "I can complete this project with absolute excellence. Turn green energy into an undeniable success story. Secure my permanent seat on the board, and then, from within, use that power to change the rules of the game." Peter studied her for a long moment. "The second option sounds a lot like what Augustus would do." "Exactly. And that's why it will work." Louisa carefully placed the folder in her bag. "He expects me to be like him. Ruthless, calculating, willing to sacrifice principles for power. And I'll let him believe that for now." "That's dangerous, Louisa. You'd be playing his game." "No, Peter. I'd be using his rules against him." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with moral implications that neither of them was completely prepared to process. "We need to get back to work," Louisa finally said. "We have to finish this audit by tomorrow." They continued working in silence, but the discovery hung between them like a shadow. Around 3 in the morning, when they finally finished, Peter asked one last question as they shut down their computers. "And Raphael? Does he know about his father's direct involvement in the destruction of Eco River's construction?" "I highly doubt it," Louisa replied. "Raphael might be arrogant and spoiled, but he's not malevolent. He imitates the behavior he's seen throughout his life without fully understanding the consequences." "Do you really believe he's changing?" Louisa reflected for a moment, recalling the past few weeks. Raphael was still difficult, often stubborn, but there were subtle signs of evolution. He had started participating more actively in technical meetings, asked genuine questions of the engineers, and had even defended Project Helios in a presentation to the executive board. "I believe he's learning," she finally replied. "Whether that constitutes genuine change or just temporary adaptation, I can't say yet." As they left the building in the cold, pre-dawn hours, Louisa felt the weight of the folder in her bag, as if she were carrying lead. Those documents represented not only the confirmation of her suspicions, but a moral test that would define her future. In the taxi on the way home, she allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to think of her father. Not the ruined businessman he had become, but the man he had been. Edward Rivers, who had refused millionaire offers because he believed he was building something greater than money could buy, who had taught his daughter that companies could be positive forces in the world, not just machines for accumulating wealth. "You were right, Dad," she whispered to the fogged taxi window. "They can't buy everything." When she finally arrived at her new apartment, much more spacious and well located than her previous one, Louisa couldn't sleep. sitting on the balcony watching the New York City skyline begin to light up with the first rays of dawn, she made her decision. She would complete the mission. She would turn green energy into an exemplary recovery case. She would earn Augustus's respect and trust. She would secure her permanent place on the board. And then, when she had real power to make a difference, she would confront the system from within, not for personal revenge, but to fundamentally transform it, to create the kind of company her father would have been proud to see. The rising sun painted the skyscrapers golden when Louisa finally fell asleep, the incriminating documents safely stored in her personal safe, not just as evidence against Augustus, but as a constant reminder of what was truly at stake. True transformation, she thought before sleep finally overcame her, doesn't come from destroying your enemies, but from transforming the battlefield itself. The next morning, as she entered the Green Energy headquarters for another day of work, Louisa carried not only the weight of the discovery, but also a renewed determination. She found Raphael already in the meeting room, surprisingly early for his usual standards. "Good morning," he greeted without his usual sarcasm. "I've reviewed the projections for the quarter. I think we're underestimating Project Helios's potential in the Asian market." Louisa studied him for a moment, trying to reconcile this engaged version of Raphael with the arrogant man from the restaurant. Were they the same person? Or was she witnessing a genuine transformation? "Show me what you have in mind," she replied, deciding to give him the benefit of the doubt. As they worked side by side, discussing strategies and projections, Louisa couldn't help but think of the irony of the situation. She had been hired to teach Raphael, but now she possessed knowledge that could destroy the image he had of his own father. "Is something wrong?" Raphael asked, noticing her momentary distraction. "No," Louisa replied, forcing herself back to the present. "Just thinking about how much has changed in a few weeks." Raphael smiled faintly, not the arrogant smile from before, but something more genuine, almost vulnerable. "My father always said that great leaders know when to retreat to advance better later." He paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he would say next. I've learned a lot by observing your approach, Louisa, the way you connect with people, not just with spreadsheets." The comment caught her off guard. It was possibly the first sincere compliment Raphael had given her. "Thank you," she simply replied, unsure how to process this new development in light of her recent discoveries. "The presentation to the board is next week," he continued, quickly returning to more comfortable ground. "If the numbers continue on this trajectory, my father will be impressed." "Your father?" Louisa hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "Do you think he would approve of all our changes in direction? Abandoning predatory tactics for more collaborative approaches?" Raphael reflected for a moment. "Augustus Almeida is, above all, pragmatic. If something works and generates results, he supports. Method is secondary to him. And for you, does the method matter?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Raphael looked out the window, contemplative. "Before you arrived, I never really questioned the methods," he finally admitted. "That's just how things had always been done. Now," he paused. "Now I'm not sure." Seeing the engineers excited again, winning back clients through transparency instead of aggressive tactics, there's something gratifying about that I've never experienced before. Louisa nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope amidst the shadows of her recent discovery. Perhaps, just perhaps, transformation didn't have to come only from the top. Perhaps it could start with Raphael, the future of the Almeida Group. "We have a lot of work ahead of us," she said, returning to the spreadsheets in front of her. But as they delved back into the numbers and strategies, a new resolution took shape in her mind. She would use what she had discovered not just as a weapon, but as a tool for reconstruction. Truth, after all, could serve both to destroy and to redeem. The meeting room on the 42nd floor of the Almeida Group headquarters gleamed under the natural, light streaming through the wide windows. The oval dark wood table gathered the conglomerate's top executives, while portraits of the founders silently watched from the walls. Louisa took a deep breath, adjusting the blazer of her charcoal grey suit. After 3 intense months, the decisive moment had arrived. the final presentation of Green Energy's recovery results. Raphael, beside her, tried to disguise his tension. An improbable professional partnership had formed between them in recent weeks, built on a mutual respect that neither would have imagined possible at the outset. Across the table, Augustus Almeida watched them with calculated interest, like someone evaluating an intriguing experiment. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Luisa began when silence settled, 90 days ago, I, along with Raphael Almeida, took on the responsibility of revitalizing the Green Energy division after its acquisition. Screens on the walls displayed charts and projections that told the story of a remarkable recovery. When we started, Green Energy was in accelerated decline. Today, we present a completely different reality. Over the next 30 minutes, Luisa and Raphael detailed the transformation, the revival of Project Helios, the recovery of 62% of lost contracts, the rehiring of key engineers, and the renegotiation of debts with suppliers. The numbers spoke for themselves. Green Energy was not only recovered but strengthened. Projections for the next 2 years exceeded the most optimistic estimates by 28%. The most impressive thing, Raphael highlighted, is that we achieved these results without a single layoff. On the contrary, we expanded the team in strategic areas. Luisa observed Raphael with discreet admiration. He was different, his arrogance now tempered with a deeper understanding of the impact of corporate decisions. "We implemented what we call the sustainable growth model," he continued. "The traditional approach has been to acquire, divest, and resell. Our proposal is to acquire, integrate, and expand." Several board members exchanged glances, surprised by this implicit criticism of the group's historical strategy. Augustus, however, remained impassive. "The results speak for themselves," Raphael concluded. "Not just financially, but in reputation, talent retention, and long-term positioning." Luisa concluded, "The Green Energy case demonstrates that it's possible to reconcile profitability with ethical business practices. It's not just about doing good, it's about building lasting value." When the presentation ended, Augustus broke the silence, applauding slowly. "Impressive. The numbers certainly exceed our expectations." After technical questions and discussions, Augustus stood up. "I believe we have a consensus. The Green Energy project is an unequivocal success. Raphael has shown significant evolution." He turned to Luisa. "And Ms. Rivers has proven to be a valuable addition to our team." As agreed, this success secures Ms. Rivers her permanent seat on this board, with voting rights on all strategic decisions. The secretary approached with the official documents. Luisa felt the weight of the moment. 3 months ago, she was waiting tables. Now, she was about to become one of the youngest executives on the board of one of the largest conglomerates in the United States. As she looked at the papers, she thought of the folder hidden in her safe, the one containing proof of Augustus's direct involvement in the destruction of her father's company. "Before the signing," Augustus said, "I'd like to propose a toast." Assistants entered with champagne flutes. "To the future of the Almeida Group. Stronger, more innovative, and apparently more ethical." "If I may," Luisa said, "I'd like to add an item to the agenda before we conclude." A surprised silence swept through the room. Adding items to the agenda was the exclusive prerogative of full members. "Let her speak," Augustus interjected, curiosity in his eyes. "I think she's earned that right." Luisa pulled a different presentation from her folder. "During our audit, we identified troubling patterns in the group's acquisition practices. Predatory litigation strategies were employed in 73% of acquisitions over the past 5 years. She showed a detailed chart. The immediate result was favorable: undervalued assets, increased market share in strategic sectors. However, she continued, moving to the next slide, the long-term analysis tells another story. Acquired companies lost, on average, 42% of their value within 3 years. Talent exodus was 3 times higher than in conventional acquisitions. Raphael unexpectedly stood up. "What Luisa is suggesting is that our traditional approach is not only ethically questionable, but financially short-sighted." "Exactly," she confirmed. "Therefore, as my first official motion as a member of this board, I propose the creation of a new ethical acquisition charter." She distributed a detailed document. This charter establishes guidelines for future acquisitions, prioritizing integration over divestiture and sustainable growth over immediate gains. All eyes turned to Augustus. He slowly leafed through the proposal. Interesting, but I must remind you that proposals of this magnitude usually require weeks of analysis before being presented. Actually, Louisa calmly replied, the charter has already been reviewed by the legal department. She showed the signed opinion. Furthermore, I'd like to highlight a specific case that exemplifies the current risks. She slid a folder across the table, directly to Augustus. Only he could see its contents. The acquisition of Eco Rivers Construction 3 years ago, she said, keeping her eyes fixed on his, resulted not only in the unnecessary destruction of an innovative company, but also in devastating human consequences. Augustus's eyes narrowed as he recognized the documents, the proof of his personal involvement in the campaign against Edward Rivers. Interesting choice of example, he commented, his voice tense. I found it particularly relevant, considering my intimate knowledge of the case. A moment of silent understanding passed between them. Augustus was cornered. If he openly opposed the proposal, he would have to explain why, and the documents made that explanation impossible. Well, Augustus finally said, it appears Ms. Rivers has done her homework thoroughly, and I must admit that Green Energy's results offer compelling evidence that her approach has merit. As chairman, I could easily table this proposal. However, I recognize a brilliant move when I see one. To everyone's surprise, he clapped his hands decisively. I second Ms. Rivers' motion. Let's put it to a vote immediately. The board members, confused by this breach of protocol, quickly fell into line. One by one, they voted in favor. Raphael was the penultimate, his yes accompanied by a look of genuine respect for Louisa. Finally, Augustus cast his favorable vote, sealing the unanimous approval of the new charter. Congratulations, Ms. Rivers. You not only earned your place on this board, you transformed its rules on day one. The meeting concluded shortly after. As the others dispersed, Augustus approached Louisa. A bold move, using what you discovered against me but packaged as a constructive proposal. Impressive. It's not about using something against you, Louisa replied. It's about correcting a misguided course. Is it? Or is it sophisticated revenge? If it were revenge, I would have made those documents public. What I did today benefits the Almeida Group in the long run. Augustus studied her for a moment. Do you know why I chose your father? Why I focused on Eco Rivers Construction? Why? Because he was exactly like you, uncompromising. He refused 3 generous offers. I admired him, you know, even as I destroyed him. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Louisa asked. No, it should make you understand. Augustus stared at her. The world isn't divided into villains and heroes. Your father acted according to his convictions. I acted according to mine. And today you did the same. Raphael approached, interrupting the conversation. The board members are impressed. Many say they've never seen such a comprehensive presentation. Augustus watched his son for a moment. You worked well with Ms. Rivers. Better than I expected. She's a demanding teacher, Raphael replied with a slight smile. But effective. Well, it seems you both learned something valuable. Augustus adjusted his suit. Ms. Rivers, officially welcome to the board. As he walked away, Raphael commented, You did it. You turned a public humiliation into a board seat in just 3 months. Impressive. We did it, Louisa corrected. Green Energy is as much your success as mine. Raphael looked at the city through the window. When my father said I'd be working with the insolent waitress, I thought it was a punishment. Now I understand it was a gift. The charter you proposed, that wasn't in our original plans. Was it? No, it was a last-minute addition. Does it have something to do with what you discovered during that late-night audit, doesn't it? Let's say I found additional motivation to ensure that certain practices do not continue to be the group's modus operandi. Will you tell me the full story one day? Perhaps, when you're ready to hear it. The secretary returned with the documents for the official signing. As she signed her name on the papers, Louisa wasn't just thinking of herself or her family. She thought of all the small businesses that would be spared from predatory tactics thanks to the new charter, of the employees who would keep their jobs, of the dreams and innovations that would survive. "Welcome to the Almeida Group Administrative Board, Ms. Rivers," said the secretary. Later, as she left the building, Louisa received a message from her father. "I'm proud of you, daughter. You didn't just survive. You transformed the system from within. I see a lot of myself in you, but also something I lacked, the ability to bend without breaking." Louisa smiled at the screen, feeling an emotion she hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. Not a peace born of satisfied revenge, but of constructive justice achieved, of real transformation, not destruction. Looking one last time at the skyscraper, she made a silent promise. The Almeida Group, under her influence, would be different. Not just more profitable, but more humane. The waitress who was once invisible was now at the center of decisions, and she would use every ounce of that power to ensure that other voices, previously silenced, would also be heard.